Chairman, I'm going live on YouTube. I'll let you know.
Yeah, go ahead and go live on YouTube. Gentlemen, let's find our seats.
You are live, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Carla. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Just go ahead and call the meeting to order. Take roll call.
Representative Bear,
Here.
Representative Burkhart,
Here.
Vice Chair Duncan.
Here.
Representative Air,
Here.
Representative Gray.
Here.
Representative Heiner,
Here.
Representative Sherwood, Representative Western, Chairman Greer,
Here.
all present.
Thank you, Carol. Appreciate that. Good morning, committee members. We're here today, continuation of our meeting on Monday. We're going to, for a period of time here, continue to take testimony on House Bill 155, 166, 258, 248. We had an explanation of those four bills on Monday. We took as much testimony as we had time for. Again, we're going back in on the floor at 10 o'clock. I'm going to reserve at least 20 minutes for the committee to contemplate and discuss these bills as our committee. So with that, I'm going to try to work through our testimony, ask people to try to keep their comments 2-3 minutes if they would. Try not to repeat to the extent that you can, but we do want to try to get everyone in. So with this is Bryce Freeman online. I see I have him on this list that I get does not correspond with anything. Okay, I think we should hear from Bryce Freeman.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm bringing him in.
Okay. What I'm going to do is take the testimony from Mr. Freeman and then let the electrical cooperatives testify next. Then my idea would be is to hit industry groups and then we'll get, as we typically our individual citizens will have time. So, okay.
Mr. Freeman should be in the room.
Okay, we can see the blank screen. Everything's just probably rolling up. While we're waiting for Mr. Freeman for those, I can see Shannon Anderson has her hand up. What I would ask is that the other folks that are attendees, I believe is how that works, if they would raise their hand if they wish to testify, just so I can get a feel for how many folks we have. So see Mike Nazi raises. Yeah, okay. Thank you, folks. I appreciate it. Mr. Freeman, are you there? Yeah, sure. Okay, we may have lost him. Shannon, why don't you work, see if you can get him in, and then let's go ahead and go to any of the cooperative that wish to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the committee. I'm Sean Taylor, Executive Director of the Wyoming Rural Electric Association. I could just say we're pretty much neutral on all these bills because actions precipitated in these are based on rate cases or integrated resource planning, which we don't do under our regulatory structure. But that having been said, I did just want to maybe give for the edification of the committee and some of the newer folks that may not be familiar with the co-ops, the relationship between the distribution folks and the generation and transmission cooperatives. So our organization represents 14 distribution co-ops across the state of Wyoming. And they range in size. We have folks, a co-op up in the northwest corner of the state, Lincoln and Teton counties, down to the Tri-County area of Goshen, Platte, and Niobrara counties. One that ranges from Medicine Bow up to Du Bois, Representative Ayers co-op over there in the Bridger Valley. So we kind of run the gamut of who we serve, where we serve. And for the most part, with the exception of our co-op in the northwest corner of the state, they get their majority of their power from the Bonneville Hydro Federal Power Authority. The other co-ops get their power, their wholesale power, from 3 what we call G&Ts, or generation and transmission cooperatives. We have one based out of Salt Lake City that serves the Bridger Valley area. We have one tri-state generation and transmission cooperative that serves 8 of our co-ops. So they serve the largest footprint. And then we have one out of Bismarck that serves our largest co-op. That's Basin Electric. And those G&Ts, they're regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission back in Washington, D.C. So when they have rates and reliability issues, the FERC kind of regulates them. For the distribution co-ops, the ones that you may be more familiar with, that get the power out to the ranchers and farmers and small businesses in rural Wyoming, we're self-regulated for rates, and that happened about close to 12 years ago. So that's why I say we're neutral on these bills, because everything in most of these bills is precipitated by either rate cases or integrated resource plans. But that having been said, Mr. Chairman, when all these bills popped kind of overnight, and not just these 4, but there's some in the Senate and a few more in the House that are floating around out there, it certainly got our attention. And I know that was because for the most part, what happened down in Texas, I know there were plenty about that coming up. But it seemed like a lot of these bills are kind of have two parts to them. One being, let's continue what you all have done with Senate File 149 from 2 years ago, House Bill 200 last year, in trying to keep our coal plants open throughout the state, and then under the umbrella of reliability. And that makes a lot of sense. But I do believe that there's a lot to unpack here. And I think we'd all be better served if a lot of this went to an interim study topic. And we'd be happy to host you all up in Gillette and take you to the Dry Fork Power Plant and, show you the control room, because reliability is both our G&T and our distribution co-op. It's our top priority. We survey our members on a pretty regular basis, and even above affordability. The lights need to come on, the pivots need to come on, the heat needs to come on. So reliability is our top priority. And but you don't need to just take my word for it. We have experts that know this stuff inside and out that we'd be happy to bring to an interim study meeting with you all. And I would just offer that up. And I testified in a Senate committee because it was Senator Perkins' bill. Again, looking more at the Public Service Commission, but this notion of the social cost of carbon came up in that meeting. And I think it would be within the purview of the committee in the interim to talk about the social benefits of carbon as well. The social cost of carbon, we're going to hear a lot about coming out of the federal administration, but I think we in Wyoming kind of understand the social benefits of it as well. So I think that would be pertinent for your committee, and we would just stand ready. The co-ops would stand ready to help out in any way we can if we go to an interim or if anything else pops during this session. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Taylor. Yeah, Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Taylor, thank you for being here and for your testimony. Some of these co-ops, they market not only conventional energy, but green energy, and quite a bit of it. Do you know specifically, well, I'm thinking of the one in the northwest part of the state that markets quite a bit of green energy. Do you know what percentage of their energy is green energy and where that comes from?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, I don't know the number off the top of my head. Like I said, they get the majority of their power from hydro. They own some of their own pump storage hydro. They also own some wind, but I couldn't tell you the percentage of what it is. I know just if I had to guess, maybe 75% comes from the hydro facilities. They do get some coal-fired power as well, and then they have their own green energy markets as well, and they own some wind and some hydro.
Okay. Any further questions? Representative Duncan.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Taylor, when your cooperatives are being forced to make business decisions and pass it on to your ratepayers, are they, based on some of the legislation in, say, Colorado, for example, are they taking into consideration all types of power, as in gas? Are they allowing you to figure in gas and some of those different cheaper forms, or are they forcing you to make decisions based on just renewables in your portfolio?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan. The easiest way I could explain that is, and you called out Colorado, so I'll use them as an example. They passed an 80% carbon reduction bill last year or 2 years ago. And in order for any utility down in Colorado to meet that, they have to take into account all forms of what they use. It is forcing some co-ops, Tri-State, for example, to shutter coal-fired power plants in Colorado. And that obviously has an impact. Tri-State provides wholesale power to 44, 43 co-ops across New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, and Nebraska. And so they do have to take into consideration their entire portfolio, but there are decisions being made. And I know there's a bill out there that would allow the state of Wyoming to push back on some of those states that do force Wyoming to maybe act one way or the other. But we do try to take into consideration, because we're member owned, we're not for profit. We're not making any of these decisions based on profit margin or, well, we obviously are making decisions based on outside decisions being forced upon us through legislation, but we're member driven. You know, we do what our members ask. And so I'm kind of dancing around that a little bit, Representative Duncan, but I do know House Bill 207 is one that we've support or will support as we move forward to try and push back against other states forcing us to do something.
Thank you, Mr. We'll see you Friday. Then.
All right.
All right, thank you. Mr. Bryce, if you're, or Mr. Freeman, excuse me. And I apologize, I didn't see your name on the list Monday if you were, so I'm getting used to this new system, but please introduce yourself. So we're not, if you're talking, we're not hearing. So Mr. Freeman, are you able to hear us? Okay. Did you have any comments, sir? We're still not hearing anything. No, we're not, sorry, sir, we're not hearing anything. Okay. See if you can't find out what's with your system. Okay, did we have anyone else from the cooperatives that were here to speak? Was that it then? Okay, let me get a kind of a show of a hand so I can see who is all intending to speak. So, okay, you know what I may do is I'll just come across the room and I'll start with Jody in the back, then we'll come forward and then come this way.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, committee. Jody Levin on behalf of the Trona industry. I can be extremely brief in my comments. We really do appreciate the focus on reliability. As industrial users, there is no issue that is more important than having a reliable power source. I would caveat that in that you have to look at reliability in the context of rates. The Trona industry is the largest industrial user in the state. They've been extremely concerned about rising electric rates. These companies literally spend millions of dollars every month. So anything that causes a rate increase really threatens the industry's competitive posture. Again, we welcome an ongoing conversation with reliability. We would actually welcome a conversation over the interim to look at all of these factors. But that's really the request, is that when you look at how to establish a reliable power source, you don't forget the impact to ratepayers.
Any questions? Representative Air?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Levin, based on your comments, I assume you are recognizing the possibility that most of these bills that we have before us are going to have an impact on rates at some point. Would you speak to that, please?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Air, that is the exact concern is how do you require a utility to essentially, the way the industry looks at it, almost have to overbuild a system in order to provide firm power, resiliency, and that will cause a significant increase in rates. I think everyone knows in Rocky Mountain Power's territory, in the state of Wyoming, 80% of their load is to the industrial users. And of that, the biggest portion of that is the Trona industry. So it is a extreme concern for the industry. On the flip side of that, however, reliability is equally important. A small interruption in power can take the plants down for an entire day. So it's really how do we balance these two issues and get it right for Wyoming? That's why honestly, they would prefer that this be thoroughly vetted over the interim. We fully understand that it is likely for something to move forward. Of the bills, Representative Duncan was asking on Monday, what bill could you potentially get behind? And for the Trona industry,
Excuse me, Ms. Levin. Okay, Mr. Freeman, we could hear you that time, so we'll pick you up next. Sorry.
It would be House Bill 166, where we believe that those are factors that the Public Service Commission is positioned to address. And obviously they are the right entity to address those considerations. The industry uses a lot of coal, they use a lot of natural gas, very worried about federal mandates. So this is obviously a very important topic to the state. And we do appreciate your focus on it, but please think about what this could do to ratepayers.
Go ahead, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What would happen, Ms. Levin, appreciate you coming in on this. What would happen if there was a Texas style event? I mean, is there a plan? What would happen if there was an event like that in Southwest Wyoming?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, I do believe the Texas situation is very unique to Texas because of their regulatory structure. But in September of 2020, we had a freak winter storm hit over Labor Day weekend that dropped, I believe it was close to 17 inches, maybe 2 feet of snow in Southwest Wyoming. And it was devastating. It was devastating to those communities, and it did knock the Trona industry offline for several days because they lost power. So it is possible. These events do happen. They're very, it doesn't happen very often, but these are all things we have to plan for. But you have that situation occurring currently. And I don't know how you necessarily plan for storms that are of that kind of nature.
Representative Burkhart, then Air.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Levin, and you may not have the information, if you could get it for me later. If you don't, I'd appreciate it. How often do the Trona mines lose power?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Burkhart, I don't have that information. Mr. Rude is here with Jenner. I don't know if he has that kind of information, but I'm happy to talk with the Trona producers and get that information back to the committee. I don't believe it's very often, but it can happen, and it can happen for strange reasons. Attacks on substations that happened a few years ago, freak winter storms. So it can happen.
Representative Air.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Levin, I have just kind of a follow-up question. When it does happen, is that usually the event are caused by a generation failure or a transmission and distribution failure?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Air, there can be a number of factors that happen. Sometimes it's even internal to the plant. There was a situation recently where one of the plants lost power because they had a major boiler go down. So there are a number of factors that play into these operations. I mean, they do a number of things to safeguard this. The industry, in fact, is building substantial and putting substantial investment into self-generation facilities because they produce steam, so they can do self-generation on site. And part of that is to help safeguard the operations so that they don't have this disruption in power.
Okay. I have one final question for you, more of a 30,000-foot question. You know, we always worry about tomorrow and what the rates will be next year. But, you know, what thought has your industry put into what happens is we keep closing down coal facilities in Wyoming and move that baseload generation away from Wyoming to more intermittent generation? What kind of effect, long-term effect, do you think that'll have on the Trona industry?
Mr. Chairman, I would tell you, it's on the mind of the Trona managers every day. They're very worried about future power sources, intermittent power, the closure of coal plants. This is, I can't stress this enough, this is an incredibly important topic to the state of Wyoming. I think this is in part why you see them building self-generation facilities so that they can protect themselves against intermittent power sources and frankly, rising electric rates. It is a very delicate balance between these two issues.
Yep, thank you. Okay, Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Levin, by the estimate of our Trona producers, do they think that renewables can sustain the type of load that they require on a consistent and reliable basis?
Good, Ms. Levin.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Western, they are very concerned about renewables and the impact to the grid. They watched the Texas storm situation. They watched the subsequent spike in the megawatt hour cap for gas. They're very concerned about overall grid reliability. That's why they welcome this conversation before the legislature, and they want to be an active participant in it. If they, got to be king for the day, they would never close a coal plant. But that's not the purview that we get to have.
Okay, committee, we're 8:21. Okay, go ahead, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Ms. Levin, you may not have this answer and you can follow up with this later, but I'd like to know what kind of cost the Trona industry is putting into this self-generation. So no need to answer right now unless you have that on the top of your head.
If it's not proprietary.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Chairman, that is something that is somewhat proprietary because these are competitor companies. So I do have to walk a fine line on antitrust, but I can get you some general figures.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
Ms.
Chairman.
Levin. Yes. All right, Mr. Freeman. Now the little red mute button is on this time.
Good grief. I'm just going to come see you next time.
I would much prefer that. I much prefer to look at the audience and yeah, but go ahead, sir. I understand the situation.
Sorry for the technical snafus this morning, Mr. Chairman. Bryce Freeman with the Wyoming Office of Consumer Advocate. I hopefully won't take too much of your time this morning, Mr. Chairman, but I did want to weigh in a little bit on the bills that the committee is considering, just from a consumer standpoint. First, let me say that I applaud all the bringers of the bills. The issues that have made their way into those bills, the reliability issues, the cost issues, are all issues that I have been raising for many years before the Public Service Commission here, as well as in regional forums such as WAC and CREPSI and other organizations. They're very important issues to customers. Reliability is no less important than affordability to customers. The cheapest service in the world is of no value if it doesn't work. So reliability is a very high priority for consumers in Wyoming. And I think you just heard Ms. Levin say that for commercial customers. That's true for residential customers as well. When we don't have reliable service, we have economic interruptions such as the Trona producers have experienced. And we also can have people die, as we saw down in Texas when we have extended outages. The bringers of these bills have managed to put their finger on most of the important reliability issues that are facing the Western interconnection right now. And those issues aren't going to get any better without some serious thought and consideration. And I think that this body and this state ought to have as much say as anybody else in the Western interconnection that uses the grid in the Western interconnection. Let me say at the outset that I believe that our baseload coal-fired generation facilities in Wyoming are economic. They serve a valuable purpose in providing grid stability and making sure that power flows on the grid. It really can't be replaced, at least at this point. There's no replacement for those baseload generation resources because they are large machines. They don't move around easily. They help the system right through disturbances and that sort of thing. So from a reliability standpoint, they are very valuable resources. And we ought to try as hard as we can to keep those resources online so that we can make sure that reliability is accounted for. The renewable resources that are coming on the system, fortunately, we've had enough baseload generation on the system and other dispatchable resources that we've been able to, what's called in the industry, integrate those intermittent renewable resources without a whole lot of cost, a whole lot of extra cost, and without a whole lot of special engineering and that sort of thing. That will be changing as we retire these large baseload generators, and that's why you see in the Rocky Mountain Power's 2019 IRP, where they are contemplating additional substantial investments in gas generation resources later in this decade as the coal plants, as they plan to retire their coal plants. So there will be costs associated, and they will be growing costs associated with integrating additional renewable resources. So that's one thing that we need to be careful of. And that is actually one of the points I think raised in one of the bills. I've spent the last 5 days trying to wrap my mind around everything that's contained in those bills. But one of the bills, I think, is trying to get at what that cost will be. What is the cost of firming intermittent renewable generation? And that, I think, is something that would be very useful to know. We try to get at that through the IRP process, through the CPCN process, but I think that needs a lot more thought. What is actually going to be the cost of integrating these additional levels of renewable resources? So having said all that, again, I think that the baseload coal-fired generation facilities in Wyoming and elsewhere for that matter, although there is a dwindling number remaining, but those are very valuable resources to the grid. So I hope the utilities that are listening don't take this as me coming to their rescue, but there are some challenges associated with the bills I think that we need to think through carefully. One of the bills I think imposes liability on the utility for outages. That will most probably raise costs for customers because that will increase the risk to utility shareholders that they won't recover their investment and earn a reasonable return on that investment. So that will increase cost to customers. One of the other bills, I think it may have been the one that tries to get the cost of firming and integration, talks about the revocation of certificates. That could be a pretty big challenge as well. I've thought about it a lot over the last 4 or 5 days. That would be an unprecedented move, especially for some of our larger utilities. I don't know what comes after that. If the certificate is ultimately revoked, then what? So, those are some things to think about. But again, I applaud the committee for this thinking. I think it's critical. I think the reliability of the system is often overlooked, especially in other states. In the states that have strict environmental regulations, they're not solving for cost and reliability. They're solving for emissions and other factors in the rate making process. And wherever reliability and cost end up, they end up. They don't really care. They're not solving for those. They're solving for emissions and other social issues. So somebody needs to be thinking about this. And I'm glad that this committee is thinking about it. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Any questions, committee? Okay, all right. We appreciate finally getting you on screen and sound and appreciate your comments. Thank you very much. Carla, why don't we get Shannon Anderson teed up, and then in the meantime, we'll come here. I'll keep working across from. Yes, sir. Yep.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Thor Nelson. I'm here on behalf of an organization called the Wyoming Industrial Energy Consumers. It's a coalition of many of the largest oil and gas, trona manufacturing companies in Wyoming, all of whom are customers of Rocky Mountain Power. And collectively, we purchase about half of the electricity sold by Rocky Mountain Power in the state of Wyoming. We're here today to oppose the bills as are before you, at least in their current form. And we oppose them for two primary reasons. One is we don't think that these will, as constituted, really get to the reliability issues that are front and center. And secondly, we're almost positive that if you do pass these bills in their current form, rates will increase, possibly dramatically. Now, let me explain a little bit about that in both contexts. First, as Ms. Levine indicated, and the Trona companies are part of my organization as well, there is no doubt that reliability is key. No doubt that that is critical for the success of the operation of commercial systems. Having said that, and this goes a little bit to the question that Representative Ayer asked earlier, 99% of the reliability problems that are experienced by customers in Wyoming are driven by the lines, not the generators. It is failures on the transmission system, it is substation failures, and it's failures on distribution that cause 99% of power outages. We do not have a problem with insufficient amounts of generation in the state of Wyoming. And part of that is because we are generously blessed by being part of a broad ranging regional system, and there is plenty of power available. In my experience doing this for 20 years in Wyoming, there's only been one instance for a very brief period of time where there was a generation issue that came up. It was resolved within a day or so, but the situation in Texas is very different from what we're experiencing here. And to the extent you want to focus on reliability, I would urge you to focus on the lines, because that's where the bulk of the problem lies. Now, relative to capacity, let me explain why we think that these bills would cause rates to increase, probably, if they were enacted in their current form. You have to understand that Rocky Mountain Power operates 2,800 megawatts of coal-fired generation in the state of Wyoming. That system encompasses 12 different generation units, okay? In Wyoming, we only consume 450 of those megawatts. The entire load of the state of Wyoming is only 1,400 megawatts. That means that if we had all of the electric generation, coal-fired electric generation facilities, you would double the amount of capacity needed to serve everyone in Wyoming. This system was built to export power. It was not built to serve the customers of Wyoming. There's simply too much of it. And if it turns out that the customers outside of Wyoming don't want the power, we can't afford to take it because we don't need that much. Relative to the 1,500 megawatts that are currently serving Wyoming customers, about 1,100 megawatts of that are plants that are either wind projects in Wyoming or projects outside of the state of Wyoming that the Public Service Commission has already approved into rates. And so we're committed to that 1,100 megawatts. And so if you create a system which forces these coal plants to stay in operation and shifts those costs from the customers outside of the state who no longer want that power to customers in Wyoming, there is no version of the world where that can be done, I think, economically. There's a lot of good reasons, and I totally agree that coal will play a critical part in Wyoming generation going forward. But the reality is what that means is probably 2 or 3 of the 12 plants. That's what we can use. That's what we could actually need in order to serve our loads. And so you want to be really, really careful about how you address the coal fleets in their entirety, which again, were built for exporting power, and not build a system which requires the in-state customers to bear the financial burden of power they don't need and will be too much than is required. The other point that I want to make is that we have worked with the legislature, with the commission for the last 3 years to put a system in place to make sure that no economic coal plant is retired in the state of Wyoming that is needed by Wyoming customers. We have 3 layers that are already built into the system. First, there was an agreement that was done, and my organization was part of that, with the other 6 Pacific Core states. It's called the Multi-State Protocol. And as part of that agreement, if any other state decides to exit from a Wyoming-based coal plant, the utility is required to make a filing with the commission, asking the commission, do Wyoming customers want to take on that responsibility? So before any plant is retired, they have to go to the commission, and the commission has a chance to determine if it's economical and appropriate for reliability for Wyoming to assume the responsibility for those plants. So that's check number 1. If the commission decides it's either not necessary for reliability or not economic, then there's a second process which came out of 159, which requires the utility to offer the plant to be sold to a third party. And so there's another check that's already built into the system to make sure that we explore every possible option before one of these plants are shut down. And then finally, in HB 200, just last year, you gave the commission the authority to create a standard considering the reliability considerations of a minimum level of dispatchable, reliable power that we have to have on the system. You've already given the commission this tool, and we are currently in the process of implementing rules to figure out how to make that work. But the great thing about the HB 200 approach is you gave the commission the tool, but you gave them the flexibility to react to ongoing changes in market conditions. The struggle with the bills before you right now, especially the couple that deal with setting a standard for 100% or 95% dispatchable, is you now have tied the commission's hands and eliminated any flexibility that they have to consider other changing dynamics and other changing situations, which may make things better for Wyoming customers in doing something with more variety of generation resources. So from our perspective, the last thing I'll say, there's no rush. And I'll echo the statements of Mr. Taylor and Ms. Levine in that you have time to do this right. As we sit here right now, we had thought that PacifiCorp may make filings in 2021 to retire some of the coal plants in Wyoming. That's not going to happen. They've indicated that they're going to defer those filings until 2022. So as we sit here today, no decision is going to get made about any Wyoming coal plants until sometime in probably the 2nd or 3rd quarter of 2022 at the earliest, given how long it takes for commission filings to go. So we urge you to take the time you need to get this right and make sure that we're not buying something that we can't afford to pay for because we in Wyoming don't need it. So that's fundamental message. The last thing is we did hear from the chairman and we did hear from the committees that, well, if we did something, what would you support us doing? And we took that to heart. And as others have indicated, we think that 166 is the most reasonable vehicle, creating some presumption, but leaving the discretion with the commission is a reasonable approach. Having said that, we have some suggestions that we wanted to make that, from our perspective, more effective. And you should have been passed out a copy of the proposed amendment to 166 that we have developed. Part of that amendment encompasses some suggestions that the PSC made. And so we've sort of folded that in and made some other suggestions to try to make that bill as effective as possible. But from our perspective, given the existing tools that this legislature has worked very hard to build over the last several years, that's all the tools you need. And otherwise, our recommendation is let the commission do its job and make sure that whatever we do, we keep an eye on reliability, but we don't lose track of the fact that rates are important and flexibility is important as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nelson. Any questions? Committee? Representative Duncan and Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to know how about, I always have a problem with the lack of transparency about how renewables are priced, because there's no baseline. Because the fact is, when it comes to reliability, when renewables aren't as reliable because of all the extra factors, and there's no transparency when it comes into the rate. So that's my issue. Can you help me with that?
Great, Mr. Nelson.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan, it is a great question, and it is an issue that my organization spends a lot of time dealing with. So in a variety of cases, you've heard people talk about the resource plan case. We participate in those. We hire economists, we hire engineers, we analyze the proposed portfolios that are being considered. We consider whether or not they have sufficient firming capacity for intermittent resources and if the intermittent resources are otherwise cost effective. These resource plans are about like this. If you pile them all up, and there is an ocean of data in there, it's transparency almost in the extreme, in that there's so much data, it almost becomes hard to internalize. But that data is there, and there is an opportunity to participate. And then secondly, I'll point you to, in the commission hearings that we had here just recently around the PacifiCorp, what was called Energy Vision 2020 projects and the repowering projects, there was another mountain of information presented about the costs of those renewable resources, how likely they are to run, whether or not they will offset more expensive resources or market purchases. And in all of those instances, after analyzing that mountain of information, the commission determined that it was reasonable to proceed forward. But having said that, from WIAC's perspective, we invest a lot of money every year to monitor all of those proceedings, to hire experts in those proceedings, and to make sure that we are being very careful about what we do and being very careful about any new resources we add, in particular the intermittent resources, to make sure that they are in fact cost effective and part of a portfolio that makes sense. So the challenge is there is the ability to engage. It's difficult and it's expensive, don't get me wrong. But I just want to assure you that, at least from our perspective, we are making that investment because it matters to us a lot whether or not the system works. And we are participating in these proceedings, both in a regional basis as well as at the commission, to keep an eye on just exactly that. Now, having said that, if we could have a conversation about if there's more information that you would like in a format that's digestible to the legislature, happy to talk about processes to get better information and get you what you need in order to make informed decisions, because like I said, analyzing these filings is not easy. But the base information is there. We just need to figure out a way to get that in a format that's digestible to you. But I want you to know we absolutely agree with you, and we're doing everything in our power to make sure those issues are considered.
Any further questions, Representative Gray?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I had a couple of questions. I mean, on the multi-state protocol front, I mean, why is Rocky Mountain Power and your clients not encouraging them to require in the multi-state protocol that any state having a renewable fuel standard that is anti-market, anti-competitive, inconsistent with reliability, inconsistent with our values, they should be covering the costs of that standard entirely. And so, part of this is in the multi-state protocol, which has not been fairly negotiated, has been negotiated in an anti-competitive way. I think we need to look at some litigation in this, and inconsistent with our values. And the other thing is over 50% of the multi-state protocol either doesn't have a renewable fuel standard or has one that is very limited. And so I just don't, your comments on rates are premised on the idea that there's no other client or no other entity in the multi-state protocol, no other state that wants fossil fuel energy, which I do not think is consistent with reality. So thank you. Do you agree?
Go ahead, Mr. Nelson.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray. So first, I can tell you that I personally participated in the multi-state protocol for many years. And there's no question that it is a challenging and difficult process. But what I can assure you is that in this protocol, as well as the previous iterations, all costs above the market appropriate price for power, for example, any prices above what it would cost for a coal-fired power plant, all costs for renewable portfolio standards are specifically assigned to and paid by the states with those standards. The system is built so that any state-specific regulation which causes the costs to exceed what would otherwise be the costs to that state are specifically charged to that state. And so from a factual perspective, I would disagree with your assertion that the states with renewable portfolio standards are somehow being subsidized by Wyoming, for example, because we fight very hard to prevent that very thing from happening. And then secondly, do people want fossil fuel? Well, it's an interesting question. So we have Idaho, who may be a state who is interested in fossil fuel, but we have Idaho Power, the largest utility in Idaho, who has announced a move to go to nearly all renewables. We have PacifiCorp that operates in Idaho, but you have to appreciate, and this is a point that I dropped off on the 3 minutes, but I'll make it now. The largest PacifiCorp customer in Idaho is Monsanto, now owned by Bayer, a German company. And they have a publicly announced mandate to go to renewable energy. So the single largest customer of Rocky Mountain Power in Idaho has said, we don't want coal. And that's a factor that ought to be considered. Then you ask about Utah. Does Utah want coal? Well, my concern about Utah is once the other states start exiting from the Utah power plants, from the Hermiston plant and the Hunter plant, if they look across the border at Wyoming and see legislation like we have before us today that says Wyoming power plants come first, and the first thing you have to do is have Wyoming power plants for Wyoming customers, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to think that Utah could do the same thing. And if the Western states exit from the Utah power plants, those will have enough power probably for the Utah customers. And so it's not that Utah may be anti-coal, it's just once every state decides we only want our own state resources to serve our customers, you could pretty soon get in a situation where Utah says, thank you, no thank you, Wyoming, we'll use the plants that are here in our state for the same reasons that you all are concerned about the Wyoming plants, and you could very quickly end up with little to no market for an export of the Wyoming coal fire generation. And that's the scenario that gives us nightmares in terms of how do we deal with that. And what that probably is going to mean is it's going to have to mean some retirements of the coal plants, because again, there just isn't the load in Wyoming to make up that difference.
Okay. Any further questions, committee? Yep. Go ahead. Please.
Mr. Chairman, so I just, some of the inconsistencies though, on this, we have to nail down the issue, okay? So when you say any decisions that are anti-competitive that are going to be paid for, I mean, when you say Monsanto has made this pledge, well then the multi-state protocol should say that any pledge that is inconsistent with, they should have to pay. They if they're going to make that decision, then there's a cost that's borne. Okay. And so they're making the decision not to take this electricity that we're producing in a good faith way, in a competitive way, and they've decided to violate the protocol. with this sort of politically correct statement they're making. Okay, and that's not on us, okay? And so that's my point.
I guess I have a question rather than, we're not gonna go back and forth and debate points like that, so. And I guess this comes down, I look at Senator Perkins's bill that's out there too, is really how do we define the real costs? And how are those costs defined? And maybe an ask for you, Mr. Nelson, is if you could maybe get this committee a list, if you would, of what external costs that are looked at in that protocol, so we can understand when you say those costs are being distributed, that we understand what all those costs are. That would be helpful to us.
Well, I can answer that question very quickly if you.
That's all right, though. I don't have enough time. So if you could do that for us, I'd appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, we have Shannon Anderson up next. And then we'll go with next person. Yeah, come on up. Get ready.
All right.
Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Anderson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Shannon Anderson on behalf of the Powder River Basin Resource Council. Our organization is actively involved in utility issues in multiple forums, and I personally have worked on topics related to coal-fired power plants in Wyoming for over 13 years. On behalf of our approximately 2,000 members throughout the state, we express our opposition to the 4 bills on your agenda today. These bills are filled with terms and conditions that are vague and problematic. They will negatively change the way utilities in our state are regulated in some very significant ways, passing along the costs and risks of these new mandates to utility customers. As you've been hearing, the bills are duplicative and conflicting with existing utility requirements for cost and reliability of service. In doing so, they raise issues of preemption with standards set by FERC, NERC, WEC, and a variety of other alphabet soup governmental and quasi-governmental agencies. The bills are also duplicative and conflicting with the Senate File 159 rulemaking that has recently wrapped up, and the House Bill 200 rulemaking currently underway with the Public Service Commission. New lawmakers might not be aware that most of the bills before you amend sections of law that did not exist a mere 2 years ago. The bills add nothing to the rulemaking processes implementing those recently passed laws, and will detract from the progress that has been made already to incorporate reliability into commission rules and decisions. We are particularly opposed to any mandates that will keep coal plants running beyond their economic or useful lives. We need to give utilities more flexibility to make the best decisions for their customers, not restrict those decisions through additional regulatory mandates that will only cost families, ranches, small businesses, and other utility customers. The bills will prevent a utility from implementing Wyoming law and commission requirements for least cost, least risk resource acquisition that is the basis of our utility laws. In doing so, the bills cost utility customers more money, and that burden will fall solely on Wyoming customers. No other state will approve these costs to be shared by customers in other states because they are not prudent or just and reasonable. Not all coal plants are created equal, and every single coal unit in the state tells a different story on cost, reliability, and environmental compliance. Many coal units are co-owned with 2 or more utilities responsible for decisions and compliance actions. Many coal units have been operating for 40 or 50 years and are merely at the end of their operating lives. Many coal units have been operating, and some coal units are under federal or state orders to close to meet Clean Air Act or other EPA requirements. As you heard from the commissioners the other day, any bill that prevents closure of these coal units will risk our state's primacy to implement these federal laws like the Clean Air Act. Looking forward, these environmental costs and risks for our coal plants will only increase and will yet again be passed along to customers unless utilities are allowed to choose other energy options. The DC Circuit Court of Appeals recently struck down the ACE rule, you're probably aware of that, and a revamped Clean Power Plan is likely in the near future. Whether Wyoming likes it or not, it's headed our way. The definitional standards set by the bills are impossible to meet. For instance, in House Bill 258, no facility is 100% dispatchable. Because of forced and accidental maintenance outages, no coal plant is available at all times to be, quote, dispatched upon request of a power grid operator, unquote. We are also very concerned about all of the penalty provisions in the bills. While in places the bill authors try to insulate ratepayers from potential utility penalties, it is impossible to truly insulate customers from these costs and risks. The penalty provisions will, at worst, be passed along to customers, and at best, they will still negatively affect utility credit ratings and could have a chilling effect on utility investment, including, ironically, investments made in transmission and distribution that will have positive benefits for reliability and cost of service. We understand and share the bill sponsors' concerns about a changing electricity grid. As you just heard from Mr. Nelson, there's a number of conversations going on in a number of forums about these really important topics. Reliability and cost are paramount concerns for any Wyomingite, but these bills won't solve our problems. They will instead hold our state back from working together proactively with our utilities and other states and key stakeholders. We ask that you vote against all 4 bills, and I stand ready to answer any questions you may have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you. Any questions from Ms. Anderson? Okay, seeing none, we appreciate your testimony. Thank you. Okay, and then we could get, it's Mike Nazzi, if I'm saying that correctly, get him teed up, please. Yep, go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Tammy Johnson. I'm the Executive Director for AFL-CIO Wyoming. I've been talking with some of our utility worker members about the bills before you today, and I think our general consensus is to ask you to slow these back in some fashion so we can have some time during the interim to discuss the impact. As you've heard from most of the people who've testified, there's a lot in these. One of the things that I'm afraid they don't contemplate is the impact on jobs. Of course, as we look at reliability and keeping coal manufacturing, coal burning plants open, that means on the surface, hey, those jobs are going to stick around a lot longer. But there is some fear among our members and the workers that what's to stop a company from saying, we're just going to build a gas fire plant south of the border and those jobs would be gone. The livelihoods of the people who live in the communities where those plants are. I asked for some data. We have about 800 employees in 3 plants, the 3 largest plants, I think, in the state. So we're concerned about that. And I think with some prudence and some time to take a look at these, maybe we won't be facing an energy or power crisis in the next 9 months or so before these could come back. And that would warrant some time to really look at them. So that, I would just urge you to maybe look at these as an interim committee topic, and we can consider those some more deeply. So thank you for your time.
Okay. Committee, any questions? Questions? Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Ma'am, you come on up and get ready. So, okay. Yeah, is Nazzi, am I saying that correctly? We'll go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself, sir.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Mike Nassi with Jackson Walker, and I've had the honor to work with many of you in the context of the Energy Council and other multi-state initiatives. While I call Austin, Texas home, I definitely think of Wyoming as a close collaborator. In this instance, I've been working with a great legal team, including some folks on the ground like Dale Cottom, on behalf of Glenrock Energy, to try to understand how to build upon this, the very strong leadership the state has shown, and particularly with House Bill 200. And I've had the honor of working on those issues, and you know, where I find myself today, and Chairman, I know we are limited for time, so I'll cut through all the introduction and get right to the essence and tell you kind of my takeaway from listening to the testimony yesterday and today is it's deja vu in hearing after hearing that we had in Texas when we didn't think we had a sense of urgency. Hearing after hearing where we said, you know, other states' reliability issues like California are different because somehow that state is different. And we didn't do anything about the retirement of nearly 6,000 megawatts of coal in our market, another 2,000 to 4,000 megawatts of gas, all because of renewable policies and distortions in the market. We had the ability to do it within our own state lines, and yet we didn't do it soon enough. You all have a different challenge, but it is the same fundamental challenge. The different challenge is that we work in a multi-state protocol in Wyoming. But that actually raises the very real urgency that Representative Duncan noted, which is these other states are erecting policies and portfolio standards that impose costs on the system. The only way for Wyoming to stand up for its values in the power grid, if it's reliability, if it's carbon capture, utilization, and storage, is to pass policies that actually arm our public officials who negotiate the multi-state protocols with that value system. There's a bill just like this being debated in North Dakota, for example, where they need to be able to take to MISO the policy to offset the portfolio renewable standards in other states because of things like MISO's executives saying they're policy takers, not policy makers. Well, in a similar sense, the multi-state protocol is like that. And with respect, Thor's representation that all of the costs of renewables are identified and negotiated in the multi-state protocol is just not true. There are deep costs to the system that are not currently transparent to the ratepayers. One key component of House Bill 258 that I was blessed to be involved with the drafting of, and as part of a larger effort to try to build on House Bill 200, is to make those costs, first of all, mandatory to be calculated, and to be transparent to the consumers. So a big part of the missing element of Wyoming policy is that we talk a lot about reliability, and you've heard a lot of people talk about reliability and how it's getting considered. But fundamentally, the IRP process in Wyoming does not mandate for renewable, non-dispatchable energy that's being used in the system to be firmed up or backed up. There's a promise of it. The reason this bill doesn't apply to co-ops is because co-ops sit around a board table and make sure they do that themselves. Public Service Commission is the Wyoming citizens' board of directors to make sure those costs get calculated and be transparent. And by imposing a firming requirement and giving the commission significant deference of how to implement it, it for the first time gives Wyoming something to take to the multi-state protocol and say, you guys value renewables, we value reliability. Let's negotiate. It is just one step, but I can't emphasize enough, and I'll certainly stand for questions so I don't take up too much time, that don't think that Texas was different. The news media talks about, oh, everybody failed. It was winterization. The fundamental flaw, and I know you guys have gotten a handout that shows graphics that I helped prepare. The fundamental flaw in Texas is we lost our reserves. We lost our base load. We have a full third of our installed capacity in Texas is now renewable, and we've lost multiple percentages of our base load. And if you look at what would have happened, if we would have still had that energy around, we would have had at best mild rolling outages for a few thousand Texans in short periods of time. Instead, the entire system broke down. And I think you all know this, but this is a statement of fact. We were within 4 to 6 minutes of the entire system going black for probably a month because we'd have had to manually restart it. And this isn't a scare tactic. I'm just conveying to you, I've had the honor of working in both of these gray states, and I've heard this all before in the state that just had this situation catch up with them too fast. And I'm all about deliberate conversation and not rushing into things. But House Bill 200 has been on the books. Prior bills have been on the books. I see what's going on in Wyoming as folks are running the clock out with no intention of standing up to the governor and the legislative call to action to make CCUS a reality and to leverage these great assets you have on the ground to bring carbon capture and zero carbon 24/7 power to the market. And that clock is running, and anything, and all of these bills have pros and cons, but they're all right motivated to get to the point of we have to value baseload. If we need to actually do CCUS to make that baseload more attractive with our neighbor states, let's get that done, but we can't wait anymore. So I'm not at all about throwing ideas together and just, close counts. But if you were to merge the concepts of House Bill 166 and House Bill 258. And I've actually prepared some amendments that I think have already been transmitted to maybe a couple of you that can merge those two concepts to just simply make this a part of the IRP process, because it's not now. Everybody's talking about how it is. It's not mandatory that these backup resources get firmed. And the cost, let me close with the cost discussion, Chairman. I am close and in fact represent many industrial users. Cost is is a legitimate sensitivity, certainly on the consumer side as well. But time and time again, every time market reforms were considered in Texas, that was the way that reforms got stopped. When folks were told we need to pay for an ounce of prevention so we're not having to pay for a pound of cure down the road, they said, no, everything will be fine. I can tell you, there are multiple legislators after 50 hours of hearings already and growing in Texas, people just like you that are wishing that they had thought long and hard about whether they were willing to actually add some incremental cost to ensure reliability along the way, rather than wait for the system to blow up. Because I think you all have read the papers. We have a multi-billion-dollar problem that is just beginning to be understood in the aftermath. So the cost of prevention is worth it. But I also want to close with a final thought, which is central to what the governor and I think what you guys have done to lead this dialogue nationally, is that throwing away perfectly good coal-fired power plants in a multi-state sector, certainly some of them might actually be justified economically. But given that the big driver for retirement is something that you all actually have a solution to, which is carbon dioxide, the idea that we will lose these assets and forever lose the jobs and opportunities associated with those assets and the test bed opportunity to commercialize CCUS technology is really a dramatic loss. Because in some ways, and I'll close with this, Wyoming's in a worse position than Texas, because at least as bad as things got in Texas, they still have 14,000 megawatts of coal left. They still can salvage it. But in Wyoming, if we lose these assets on the ground and we don't start right now forming policies to get CCUS commercialized and deployed, to value firming and make those costs transparent, you're going to lose the opportunity forever to do that. So with that, I'll stand for questions, Chairman.
Well, thank you. Committee questions, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Nassi, thank you. That testimony it was brilliant. And, you know, I want to ask specifically about the multi-state protocol language, because I think even in 248, I think you're trying to get at the transparency point, but I'm not sure the language is quite there, in that we need to stay in a finding or in our statute that any of the costs incurred by, say, company X, you know, with some politically correct narrative saying they're going to reject any of our coal-fired electricity, they're not going to accept it, like the example from Idaho that was given earlier. They need to incur that cost from the fact that they're not demanding what we're producing. And I think we just need to say it as a legislative finding, or demand that it be negotiated in the multi-state protocol that they're going to carry that cost. We are not. Is there some language? How do we do that?
Very tricky. And for to be efficient for the chairman's time, I think it's a very legitimate thing to be talking about what we should arm our officials in negotiating the multi-state protocol. Those costs are real. But I think I actually just want to say that when companies are virtue signaling, if they're actually saying renewable as opposed to zero carbon, and even zero carbon has, you know, major costs, right there, that shouldn't be a legitimate ask of any power provider. Renewable is not a value system. It's a belief system, okay? If carbon is what we're trying to reduce, hate the emission, not the source, right? So I respect that your interest in trying to articulate what a company's decision would be, but the real point is that the regulated utility doesn't have to take on the value judgments of those companies. They're using that as an excuse for why they need to do these things. Okay, great, but why are they not leading away from a demand for renewables to a demand for zero carbon and facilitating CCUS technology. I just don't see how in the current world where we have thousands and thousands of coal plants on the ground all over the world, that anybody who's serious about climate change is not thinking that Wyoming needs to be the epicenter and every surrounding state should be contributing to the commercialization of CCUS. So I think that study needs to be made as to what the actual cost considerations are. But there is just no way that the current multi-state protocol imposes the true and total cost of renewables on those fuels. The transmission cost, the backup power cost, the distorting effects of subsidy costs, all the things that I think most Wyoming leaders know about, those things are not part of the cost impugned to renewables, and they need to start to be. And I think House Bill 258 merged into one or more of the other bills could start that dialogue. We need to do more to step up the urgency of House Bill 200. That is a great law, but frankly, the clock's being run on it. So that's the whole idea of this session is how do we make the players involved take it more seriously?
Thank you. Any further questions, committee? Representative Ayer has a acquisitive look.
Well, I'm not sure I can phrase an intelligent question here, but I'll try. You mentioned that Wyoming is not far different from Texas. Would you compare Texas's total generation requirements to how much that was furnished by baseload coal generation compared to Wyoming with, I think Mr. Nelson mentioned 2,800 megawatts of coal generation in Wyoming, and only a fraction of that could serve all of our state's load. So I just expand on that.
Yeah, Representative, you know, the subtle point there is that Wyoming is a part of a bigger energy system, and there's no denying it, right? Texas has got this isolated grid, at least 90% of it. So it has, you know, roughly a third renewables installed capacity that operated at less than 9 or sometimes 1% during the outages, right? We have about a 12% installed capacity of coal, and about 20% of the energy during the storm was provided by coal. But the point that's being taken is artificial lines are being drawn around Wyoming to say, hey, we've got everything that we need, and we're an exporter, so we don't necessarily have the ability to tell other states in the multi-state protocol that firming can be required and there needs to be transparency. And that's just not true. Each state has the ability to take to that negotiation its value system. And Wyoming has frankly bailed out the other states when they needed energy most. And I think it has done a great job of trying to stand up for its interest. And just because Wyoming doesn't consume all the energy that it produces doesn't mean it shouldn't fight for reliability, because if the system goes down because of voltage loss or instability because renewables drop off too fast, that's going to back up to Wyoming. Wyoming is going to have a problem. And remember, we're not in a steady state condition. We're going to lose these coal plants unless something's done. And once these coal plants are gone, Wyoming is going to be in a totally exposed situation if it doesn't actually require some form of firming and transparency the cost of those other resources in the meantime.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any further questions? Okay. All right, Miss, you good, Representative Ayer? Okay. And you can. Go ahead, Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a real quick question, worst case scenario. I know it's unrealistic, but people throw it out as an assumption. If Wyoming were to flip a switch tomorrow and cut off all the other states and cut off the power to all these other states, what is the realistic scenario there? Would the other states in this worst case scenario be able to scramble and be able to have their own power to where we would be able to dictate and demand these scenarios that we're demanding? Would we have that power in that magical situation?
Go ahead, Mr. Nazzi.
Yeah, I mean, there are, because you have a multi-state situation, you have interstate commerce issues, very complicated, but let's just take the law to the side for a second. If that power is essential to that system. So the fundamental premise of your question is spot on. They love us when they need us, and they just park us when they don't. And that's going to continue to be a trend. And we don't have time to fully talk about it, but all one needs to do is look at what happened in California last summer, where they completely dependent upon imports from power plants they consider almost criminal to take power from, gas and coal plants, but they park those power plants for the majority of the year when they don't need them. That is the phenomenon that happened in Texas in its own microcosm, and it's continuing to happen more in the multi-state region in which Wyoming is a part of. So it is a very good point to make that they can't currently do without us when they need us most, but the policies that are moving forward are eroding the economics of being able to keep these facilities open. And what I love about what Wyoming's done is they haven't just said, woe is me, take my coal plants as they are. The policies that this body has passed in partnership with the governor are, listen, we'll meet you halfway. We'll make this stuff carbon neutral, and we'll change this dialogue forever for us and for the world. And what's disappointing and frankly disheartening is that the parties that could step up to make that happen seem to be running the clock out on that idea.
Okay, any further questions? Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Okay, ma'am,
sir.
and you had your mask on, so I didn't get your name clearly, so please introduce yourself.
My name is Denise Parrish.
Parrish, thank you.
Parrish. And I am currently a private state employee, but I spent years of my career in utility regulation, 28 of them with the state of Wyoming. And so maybe I'm a little more than Jane Citizen, I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, clear. Ms. Parrish worked for the OCA for a number of years and probably knows more about the multi-state protocol than anyone, that maybe Bryce Freeman is close, but she has represented Wyoming very well for many years in that process.
well, it's good praise coming from you, Representative Air, so please continue. ma'am.
Thank you. I didn't want to use my time to talk about the multi-state protocol, but I will just respond by saying that many of the questions that Mr. Nassy raised have been raised and have been discussed in the protocol, the cost associated with renewables, the cost of transmission, some of those. So many of those things that he said should be discussed have been discussed. And I believe Wyoming is well represented by Mr. Nelson, Mr. Freeman, Ms. Anderson, and others. I've submitted written comments to the committee, and I don't want to repeat my written comments. But there was, as I listened to Monday's testimony and thought about the bills a little bit more, there's just a couple more things I wanted to add to those comments. Really, the goal of the PSC is to balance reliability and affordability and cost. And these bills, I believe, provide incentive to increase costs to customers and may or may not have any impact on reliability. I don't think they really will change much in terms of reliability unless there is an extreme cost. For instance, I heard people on the committee on Monday indicate that we have to have 100% reliability of our grid and our system. Well, then you're going to have redundancy of every not only generator, but transmission line. And that is extremely expensive, something that the citizens of the state just cannot afford. So it's always been a question of how much risk is the utility willing to take in terms of one in 100-year event, one in a 50-year event type thing. And that's how this planning is built. The other thing I really wanted to mention to you is when I looked at the bills that had 95% or 100% dispatchability requirements in it, the system for, and I know we're not supposed to use proper names, so the largest electric provider in the state already on its system, without adding additional resources, without the replacement of the potentially retired coal plants, has 15 to 20% renewables on its system today. And capacity being provided. So when you talk about going to 100% dispatchability, you would have to retire existing facilities in the state and replace those. And I'm not sure that's really your goal, because what is the economic impact of that? There is an economic impact of that. And so I would urge you to really rely on the Public Service Commission to do its job. And just 30 seconds more in terms of when you're talking about deep costs and whether all of the costs of renewables and all of the costs of retiring coal plants have been considered. I know there was a bill at appropriations yesterday talking about the PSC identifying and talking about externalities. And I think that's sort of overlaying some of the discussion here, the impacts on communities and the impacts on jobs in the state. The problem with some of the bills that I've been seeing on that are the PSC can identify those costs, but then what? I mean, so if they identify that a community will have a big impact, if they identified that that jobs will be lost, the PSC doesn't have the authority to do anything about that under the bills and under its current authority that I have been able to identify.
All right, well, thank you. Any questions, committee? Okay, well, go ahead, Representative Bear.
Ms. Parrish, would you speak to the tools that have been given to the commission by the two pieces of legislation talked about the most, Senate File 159 and then HB 200 last year? Do they give the commission enough tools to guarantee the reliability of our grid?
I believe they do. And I believe even without those bills, the commission has always had the authority to look at I mean, service, the provision of services really underlies all of the work done by the PSC. So they've always had general powers. Some of these additional bills have just given them more explicit powers in that regard.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. For your
Thank
time.
you.
All right, committee, I see even a late hand coming up. So I'm going, just go ahead and take hopefully quick testimony from Joyce Evans, and then I'm going to close testimony. Yeah, so two more hands popped up, and I had requested to have all the hands up so I could manage the time. But please, ma'am, introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Joyce Evans. I am a native Wyomingite, a resident, a voter, a rancher. I'm even the mayor of a small town, but I'm not talking in that capacity right now. And most importantly, I'm a ratepayer in 3 different Wyoming counties. So I want to step back today and take a little bit different perspective on all of these bills that you're considering and some others that are related to them. Let's pretend for a minute that we're not in the Minerals Committee, but we're in an Ag Committee. Let's pretend I'm a beef rancher, which isn't much of a pretend. And let's say that many people in the US are just not eating meat anymore. I start to see my profits go down and I get concerned. So I come to you and I holler, hey, do something. I'm the third biggest industry in Wyoming. And after all, I am iconic. So you try. You're good representatives and you do what you can. First of all, you kind of deny that there's a problem. And then we start berating those people that are vegetarian and won't eat beef. And we call them a few names, but time goes on and nothing changes. My profits keep going down. So I come to you again and I say, I give up. I have to sell out. I can't go on with this. And you say, oh, no, that's not a possibility. We'll pass some laws to help you. And so you start suing the vegetarians, but then you tell me, we don't want you following these market forces, and you have to keep doing things like you've always been doing them. And I don't want you adjusting. So we're going to pass a few laws to make sure that you don't adjust anything and don't change anything. So what else could go wrong? Well, there's a big food shortage in Texas. And we all get genuinely concerned. We're all worried about that. So you come back and you pass a few more laws. Well, by the time you're through passing these laws, if little Susie in 10 Sleep doesn't pass her SATs because she was worried about being hungry, I end up having to pay a fine to her family. And I still can't change how I'm doing business. It's all pretty ridiculous, isn't it? Good thing that wouldn't really happen. But what I want you to think about is these bills and other bills just like them are asking you to do something to the industry, the electrical industry, which are things you wouldn't even consider doing to Wyoming ranchers. And those things are, these bills are trying to make you try to take control of market forces and legislate them. That just can't be done. They're trying to divert attention from diversification and from transitioning, for actually helping the people and communities that are impacted by the loss of mining and industrial jobs. They're hurting consumers by forcing the use of a technology that is outdated. And worst of all, they are causing a raise in the rates that we have to pay just because something is iconic. I thank you for your time. I appreciate your service. Please give this significant thought.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Evans. We appreciate it. Okay, we've got two more people and they were on the list. We've got about 5 minutes if we're going to have any time to have a discussion as a committee. So let's go ahead and let's bring in, and I'm having trouble seeing this, it's Joshua Macy. Hopefully we keep and try to be brief with our comments. And then what's the other one? Lynn Hutchinson? Okay. And hopefully, and they will close testimony. So it's Joshua Macy. Okay. Okay, so Lynn, why don't you go ahead? We can see you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Okay. Good morning, Chairman Greer and members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you this morning. My name is Lynn Huskinson. I'm a retired coal miner and concerned citizen from Gillette, Wyoming. I worked 39 years in the Powder River Basin at Eagle Butte Coal Mine. My concern and my opposition to the bills is I don't understand the way that I don't understand them, and I don't understand how they will work. Rather than going into the content of through the bills and what I do and don't understand, I'd like to focus on my perspective of what's happening in coal country. I live in Gillette and I have 7 neighbors, coal miners, on my block, and they've all shared hardships of what is happening in coal country. And as a kid, as a coal miner, a young miner, I remember the running joke at Eagle Butte was that Black Thunder spilled more coal than Eagle Butte could ever produce. And the reason I say that joke is that when you read that Black Thunder is moving away from thermal coal, one of the biggest players in the basin, Arch, I question the logic of these bills. When Spring Creek is shut down, when Buckskin, my neighbor, says that they're not running night shifts anymore, when ESM loses its biggest coal contract and is surviving on diversion trains, I don't understand the viability or how these bills are going to work. And I guess my concern that this is a little too late, that this legislation and the legislature would serve the people of Wyoming better by writing bills that address the energy transition, a just transition, and the responsibilities of what we can do now that coal is no longer king, and that we make reclamation and taking care of our communities and making them a safe place to live, and possibly, you know, embracing what the Biden administration is saying, that they're providing tools to help coal communities. And, you know, rather than butt up heads against them, maybe we should actually try to work with this new administration and get the monies and help our communities and help the people of Wyoming. And I appreciate your time and your interest in this topic. And thank you very much.
Well, thank you for your comments. And I will say this committee will be looking at energy transition bill on Friday. This committee just passed out amendments to a bill recognizing the importance of reclamation. And we do have an all of the above energy policy mindset on this committee. And again, appreciate your comments. Any snow up in Gillette?
We're getting it. Not
Okay,
like Casper.
awesome. All right. Then it's Mr. Macy, please.
Thank you. And sorry for coming late. I had to duck out for an hour to assess a PhD student's qualifying exam. So I'm a law professor at the University of Chicago. Right now I'm teaching energy and bankruptcy law. And I want to make 3 brief points about these bills in a sort of general sense. 1 engineering point, 1 legal point, and 1 economic point. So the engineering point is just about reliability. The vast majority of reliability issues in the grid occur because of transmission failures or system outages. So it is possible that changing the resource mix will improve reliability. But if you really want a 100% reliability standard, it involves doing things far beyond regulating the resource supply. The second point is a legality point, which is I read these bills, and it appears to me that one of the goals is to exert pressure on neighboring states to change their own resource preferences. And there are a variety of ways to do that. Some are economic, but some seem to involve legal challenges. And so I just want to make 1 point about the dormant commerce clause of the Constitution and even Wyoming's own involvement in that. So Wyoming has been actively involved in litigation challenging the Pacific Northwest states' attempt to prohibit export terminals. And the theory that Wyoming has brought is a sensible one. It's that other states lack authority to regulate Wyoming. This is called an extraterritorial regulation. So the parts of the bills that would seek to regulate other states would face really difficult legal challenges insofar as they attempt to extraterritorially regulate. That's not to say that they're all illegal. Many face economic issues, but that the parts that would try to strong arm through legal measures other states into changing their own resource preferences would face the exact same problem that Wyoming has argued in trying to challenge the export terminals. And I think this is in some ways sensible. Wyoming would be unhappy if Oregon came and sued Wyoming about its own resource preferences. And so there's a constitutional tenet that holds that states have to regulate within their boundaries. The last point I want to make is a simple one, which is that I quickly looked at like some of the economic, who's buying electricity from various facilities in Wyoming, and Wyoming seems to export a great deal of power. And so assuming that states continue to have the resource preferences that they have, the cost to bills that would insist that Wyoming then captures the is willing to pay whatever it costs to keep these facilities online is an open empirical question, but it looks like it could get extremely high. And so thinking of Wyoming as an island that's shielded from the rest of the Western interconnection could lead to sort of economic costs far beyond what would happen if it relied on a more market-based approach. Again, I'm very sorry to have been late. I appreciate your giving me the time to talk, and I'm happy to follow up on any factual points.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Macy. Questions? Okay, doesn't appear to be any. Thank you. We appreciate it. Okay, we'll close public testimony. Talk about wrangling cats. Fortunately, I'm good at it. So committee, and I've shared this with all of you, I believe, is I'm going to keep 166, or excuse me, I've got more paper here than I want. What I want to do is keep 155 and we'll just hold 155 and 258 back. We've had some informal discussions and we've gotten some good testimony all the way around on those. And there is a strong desire, I know, to look at reliability and some of this transparency requirements. I think we all agree the liability component is probably a bit much at this juncture. I am not inclined in any way, shape, or form to not take any action on this issue this session. More than happy to continue to study it and to work on these issues to the interim. We have made a decision within leadership that this committee will take the lead on these discussions. And the reason for that is because of the extreme importance of the tie-in with our initiatives with respect to carbon capture, sequestration, and utilization. I run a business that uses not as much as the Trona mines, but we use a lot of electricity. We also use a lot of natural gas. And I had to shut down operations because of the demand on natural gas to make up for the sudden swing from renewables to natural gas to pick up that load. So the ramifications on energy distribution are significant and reach all the way to the little town of Wardland, Wyoming. So what we'll do, with respect to the production standards, we're going to, Representative Bear, we're going to kind of talk about that this summer, okay? I want to keep the discussion going and try to find some of the good things without the very harmful items or scary things that were mentioned by many people here today on 258 and 155. And with the concept of working on those, I've also been working with my colleagues in the Senate, and we'll try to get those together. I'll get those distributed around, and maybe it's Monday morning we're able to look at something that we can possibly take action on or work. With respect to 166 committee, I had worked up a set of amendments that I had penciled in. I had asked LSO to provide a substitute bill. I think there were some extra copies there. Then I received these amendments from industry last night. Looking at them, relying upon my failing mind, looks like we captured about 90+% of those amendments, if not a few more. My thoughts on the substitute bill is to get something to the floor. We will be running out of time, and I want to get something here. This bill has been identified as being probably the least offensive. We've come through, did some conforming language. I think it gives the PSC a little something to work. So I guess on a process, what I'm asking the committee is to go with me on that we would move 166, that we would then go ahead and move the substitute bill, which is a standing committee amendment. And then we work that standing committee amendment with the just shy of 20 minutes that we have left. I'm seeing no one glaring at me. Okay, so 166 has been moved by Representative Duncan, second by Representative Western. Okay, with respect to the substitute bill.
Mr. Chairman, I would move the substitute bill as an amendment to 166.
Okay, then moved by Burkhart, seconded by Western. Okay, so committee, why don't we, with this in hand, why don't we go ahead? Is there any general comments on this? And we do have Carol, we will have a couple of little technical corrections on this. Representative Bear found and then a site that was wrong, and then Burkhart and Sherwood fixed my grammar or something like that. Anybody have any general discussions or comments on 166?
So, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, are we looking on the red line version of amendment?
So Representative Bear
Or is it
does
gonna
say
work on
substitute one.
Okay.
But if you would like on the lined version for your edification, folks, the one I had given to the committee members, it is easier to follow what the changes are.
Okay.
Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quickly, I have two proposed amendments here for discussion. Can you tell us where these originated? I have one that has green and yellow on it, and then one that's just a type list.
These came from Mr. Nelson's organization and
both of them, Mr. Chairman.
yes, yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you.
yes, this is what I looked at last night.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. This came from you.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, were we all, okay, now the cat herding, does require a little patience on my side. Everybody's got the substitute bill, the substitute one? Okay. Then for the ease of working through it, does everyone have sort of the lined bill with it?
Yes.
Okay. And this bill was worked yesterday by, or Monday by Speaker or Chairman Harshman. Okay, so what we'll do, then we'll work this amendment and I'll do just a little bit of what the changes are on here, if that works for everybody. Okay, page 1, any amendments? Ready? Okay, on page 2, what we did is we instead of restating the definition.
I'm sorry, Mr.
Go
Chairman.
ahead,
I
Representative
just
Bear.
like, maybe have a quick discussion. I really like the findings in 258.
Yes, sir.
I don't know if we want to think about, I know that's good and bad, but there's some good statements made there. And I don't know if we want to think about doing that as we need a whole amendment or second reading amendment, or want to talk about it here for just a second.
So Representative Bear, if we take the other two bills, 258 and 155, my thoughts are is we will take those findings and put that in that bill. We'll look at some of Representative Gray's work on the reliability component of it, and then we'll take Representative Zonitzer's work regarding the transparency and what we talk about in terms of the costs, the firming costs and so forth.
And that'll be part of our interim discussion.
That would be part of 155 if we were to do a substitute bill for that and bring that out after the weekend. Does that make sense? Okay, on 161 then, on page 2, I'm going to try to speed up here. You can see what those changes are. We'll just use the statutory reference to the definition. Early retirement does not make sense. And we took out the end of the facilities depreciable life. We need to define retirement, not early retirement. Okay. On page 3, committee, we've inserted electrical generation facility means, and this was comments that we received. Facility located in Wyoming uses coal or natural gas to generate reliable and dispatchable electricity to customers. Representative Bear, then, is this reliable where we have a correction?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, on line 2 of page 3, I move that we amend Romanet number 6 to be Romanet number 4.
Is there a second? Okay, second by Western. And Carol, you've got that on the substitute bill, right? Okay, very good. We're tracking. All those in favor of that?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the amendment's adopted. Okay. Then we've come on in because we are going to deal with the issue of resiliency different. We're going to pull that out. And that's a discussion for a later day. Right. Then we get into what is the real intent or the meat of the bill. And most of the changes on that are just sort of a form for the most part, but it's the rebuttable presumption against early retirement. That's the arrow for the PSC. Okay, the rebuttable presumption continues over the other page, and then we are just being clear and that we have still there on page 3, that we have the and in place. Okay. And then I think what we work to, and this gets into 37.3.118, dealing with sort of the rate making. And this was not part of industry's recommendation that came in, but dealing with the recovery of earnings on a capital cost associated with non-coal or, and I believe Representative Sherwood, you might have an amendment to say non-natural gas.
Yes, I would like to make an amendment just to make sure that's clear that
Okay.
it's non-coal and non-natural gas.
Second.
Seconded by Representative Burkhart. All those in favor of the amendment?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that. I don't know.
Page
what line.
5, line 4. It says so it says new non-coal or non-natural gas.
None, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. Okay, all those in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Anything further? Any discussion on the bill? Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not trying to be difficult here. I just want to make sure our process is, did we vote on the substitute bill? I'm not to make that the amendment. I just want to make sure that we're okay.
We're going to vote on what will be the amendment right now. So Representative Gray, and it's a good question, but we brought the substitute bill, which is a standing committee amendment. We've made 2, what I'm going to call minor corrections to it. Does that make sense to you? Okay. All right. So what we're going to do is go ahead and then this will be a vote like on amendment for the substitute bill. All those in favor of the substitute bill, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, opposed? Okay, now we'll take a roll call vote on 166.
Representative Bear,
Aye.
Representative Burkhart,
Aye.
Vice Chair Duncan. Representative Air. Representative Gray. Representative Heiner. Representative Sherwood. Representative Western. Chairman Greer.
Aye.
Would be 8 ayes, 1 no.
Okay, thank you. Now
It's
we've
do
got a
pass
cou-
with amendments, I'm
Yeah, do
sorry.
pass, yeah, thank you. Do pass as amended, thank you. Okay, committee, any comments on the 3 remaining bills? And again, I'm going to hold them back. So we've got a few minutes for a few more. Okay. All right.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative
Mr.
Burkhart.
Chairman, I'll commit to looking over those over the weekend if we want to discuss them potentially Monday.
and firm up any comments I might have.
Representative Burkhart, we're going to work on this evening.
Okay. After everything else, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, we're in
Thank you.
16, 18-hour
Okay,
day mode right
that's-
now. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. All right. All right, then, let's get back up on the floor. We got the budget to get marked up. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to thank, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for your work and you've been really working a lot on these. So thank you and I look forward to continuing to work with you on this. Thank you.
Representative Gray, I like people that compliment me. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.